Forkies. Today I'm gonna show the theory in the Two Knights attack of the Caro-Kann defense. Of course, the Caro-Kann defense starts after the moves 1 e4, controlling the center, and now black chooses to play the Caro-Kann defense with the move pawn to c6, of course preparing the move pawn to d5 in the near future. And now the best move in the position is to play the move pawn to d4, but in this game, white chooses to play the move knight to c3, entering the two knights attack variation of the Caro-Kann defense. And of course, after knight to c3, d5 is the only move, and now knight to f3 is the starting point of the two knights attack of the Caro-Kann defense. And now black really has only two choices: either he will play bishop to g5 or he will take the e4 pawn. So bishop to g4 is the main line, so we're going to take a look at the move d takes e4 firstly, and of course now white needs to take the e4 pawn, and now knight to f6 is the only move for black in the position. And now of course the e4 pawn is attacked, and you can see white only has two options: either he will take the f6 knight or he will play the move queen to e2. So queen to e2 is the sideline, and after knight takes e4, queen takes e4, now black has two options: either he will play knight to d7 with the idea of knight to f6, or he will play the move queen to d5, of course. So queen to d5 is the sideline, and after queen to d5, queen h4 is the best move, and after queen e6, check, of course. Now bishop e2 is the only good move for white, and after queen to g4, black is kind of forcing the exchange of queens, and after queen g3, h3, this is still theory, bishop f5. And now black is simply attacking the c2 pawn, but white plays the move pawn to b3, and now of course the pawn cannot be attacked, because after e3, the bishop on c2 would get trapped. So after knight to d7, simply developing, maybe trying to castle queenside, now bishop to b2 is the best move, and after e6, white simply castles long, and you can see this is the end of the theory. White has an open rook on the h-file. Black will simply develop with the move bishop d6 and will choose either to castle short or to castle long, and will have a pretty balanced position. So taking the knight on f6 is slightly better, and now of course black has two choices: either he will took our knight with the e-pawn, or he will took our knight with the g-pawn, of course. And taking with the g-pawn is not very good. Of course, the g-file is open, bishop h6 is an idea in the middle game, of course, but after d4, white is grabbing space in the center, and after bishop g4, bishop e2 breaking the pin, of course, white is ready to castle. Now black plays the move e6, trying to develop his bishop from f8. After white castles, bishop d6 is the best move, but after c4 you can see white has a lot of central space and will simply be better in the middle game, of course. After queen to c7, this is kind of the end of the theory, and the h2 pawn is kind of attacked, because after bishop f3, the pawn on h2 is hanging. But after c5, this is the end of the theory. Black should be worse in this position, of course, with the fact that these three pawns are kind of isolated. This pawn on h7 will be weak, and of course white has a lot of central space, maybe potential to attack on the queen side as well. So taking with the g-pawn in this position is not particularly good. Taking with the e-pawn, this knight is much better. So after e takes f6, d4 is the best move, of course, taking away space from black. And after bishop d6 developing and trying to castle, we play the move bishop d3, trying to castle as well. h7 will be kinda weak in some positions, maybe c3, bishop c2, and queen to d3 is an attack on the weak h7 pawn. And after, of course, black castles, we castle as well, and now bishop to g4 is the best move, of course, pinning the f3 knight to our queen on d1, of course. And after h3, bishop h5 is the best move, maintaining this pin on the f3 knight, of course. And after rook e1, trying to take e-file for himself. Now black plays the move knight d7, trying to develop, of course, and c5 is potential pawn break in the center, of course. And after c4, this position is very good for white. White is taking a lot of center in the space, and after rook e8, queen e8, you can see position is kinda equal in this version of the two knights attack, but after bishop e3, of course, kinda developing the queen side, of course, and kinda closing down the open e-file. Rook to d8 is the end of the theory, kinda pressuring this d4 pawn, but of course rook to c1 will be played, maybe b3 and queen to c2, attacking the h7 weakness, and the position is kinda equal. g4 is an idea as well for white, and this position is very good for both sides, but I think the two knights attack is very good for white, and this knight to f6 and taking this pawn is kinda slightly better for white, especially if you will take knight with your g pawn, of course. And after knight to f3, the best move for black is to simply play the move bishop to g4, pinning the f3 knight to the queen, and this is the main line. I play this with black pieces, of course. And after h6, the only move in the position, now you have two choices. Either you will follow the main line with the move bishop takes f3, or you will after h3 play the move bishop to h5, but this is not particularly good, because after e takes d5, c takes d5, we play the move bishop d5 check, and after knight to c6, we play g4, bishop is forced to go back to g6, and now we can play the move knight to e5, attacking the c6 knight and putting some pressure on this weak g6 bishop. You will see why it is weak. After rook to c8, defending the c6 knight, of course, we play this very good move d4, and after e6, we play this extraordinary move h4. Of course, we are threatening to trap this bishop with the move h4, of course, after with h5, excuse me, and of course, if something like knight to e7 is played, h5, bishop e4, we don't take the bishop, we'll play the move pawn to f3, and this bishop is simply trapped. Therefore, after the move h4, f6 is kind of forced, and now we can take the bishop with our knight, and after h takes g6, we simply develop the move queen to d3, of course attacking the g6 pawn, and after the only move king to f7, of course defending the g6 weakness, we play the move bishop takes c6, and after rook takes c6, the theory goes bishop d2, and after bishop b4, of course black is kinda putting some pressure on this weak c3 knight. We play the move knight to e2, kinda offering a trade of dark squared bishops, and after bishop d2, queen d2 is of course the only good move, and after knight e7, we simply castle long in this position, and of course have much better position in my opinion, although the computer is saying the position is only slightly better for white, and of course there are some attacking potential for black as well, but I think that this king on f7 is kinda weak. Will play g5 in some position and will try to open up his king side, of course attacking this f7 king. So after h3, I think black should take our knight with the move bishop takes f3. Why? Because of course bishop h5 is leading into some complications, so bishop takes f3 should be the best, and after queen takes f3, of course this is the only move. Now this is the bread and butter of the two knights attack of the Caro-Kann defense. Of course now e6 is kind of forced because the pawn on d5 was attacked, and now white has four options. The first option and the main line is to play the move pawn to d3. The other option is to play pawn to d4, more aggressively trying to take over the center. Then there is this very good positional line with the move bishop to e2, and there is a very aggressive move pawn to g3 trying to play bishop to g2 in the near future, and this is what I faced against 2000 rated FIDE player, and I completely lost my position with the black pieces. So g3 and bishop to g2 is very good if you are going to play the white pieces in this position. So bishop to e2 is the worst line of all four of them, and of course after bishop e2, white is simply preparing to castle king side, of course, and after knight to f6, kinda putting some pressure on our e4 pawn. we simply castle, and after knight b to d7, black is developing his queenside, and after the move d4, taking away the center, d takes e4 is kind of forced, and after knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, you can see this very common idea, knight to f6 attacking our queen. And if you will remember only one thing from this video, you should remember that after knight to f6, your queen always belongs to d3, where you will play c4 and d5 in the near future. So after bishop d6, black is preparing to castle, and now we play this very crucial idea, bishop to f3. In the two knights attack of the Caro-Kann defense, this light square bishop almost always belong on this diagonal, maybe from g2, but as well as from f3 square, of course with the idea of c4 followed by d5 pawn break. And after black castles, this is kinda the end of the theory, but I would suggest you to play move c4, maybe g3 bishop g2 is okay as well. You will put this c1 bishop on e3 or on g5, you will see in the game, and rooks on d1 or c1, of course. And this was the first variation, bishop to e2 is the worst of them all, but it is a great opening surprise for your opponents if they won't know what to do. But if they will know what to do, your position will be kinda equal at least. And after the move e6, there are three other options. Bishop to e2 was just covered, and the next alternative to this is the move pawn to g3, preparing to play bishop g2 and simply castle short. And after g3, knight to f6 is the best move, again attacking the e4 pawn, or at least pressuring the e4 pawn. And after bishop g2, you can see that this bishop will be very active on this diagonal, especially after d4 and c4 will be played. And after bishop g2, knight b to d7 has to be played, and after d4, d takes c4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, e takes d4. Now knight to f6 is played again, and now you should play queen to d3 as I mentioned before, and c4 is an often idea. And you can see this is very similar to the position after this queen to d3, but your bishop is on e2 instead of g2 here after queen to d3. And after queen d3, bishop e7 almost has to be played. Of course, bishop d6 is not particularly good because after c4, d5 can be played more easily. And after castles, black castles as well. And now rook to d1 kinda has to be played. Of course, idea of white is to play c4 and d5 in the future, opening up the diagonal for this monstrous g2 bishop. Of course, you will play bishop e3 and rook to c1 as mentioned earlier, and you will have a good position if you are white here. But of course, after e6, there are two other variations. Either you play d3 or you play d4. So d4 is the sideline. Once again, we are simply taking as much space in the center as possible. d4 is simply, of course, defending the e4 and the c5 square. And after d takes e4, queen takes e4 is the best move now. And after knight f6, where your queen belongs? Of course, it belongs on d3. And after knight b to d7, black is simply developing his queen side. And after g3, this is very common idea in the two knights attack of the Caro-Kann defense. Your bishop belongs on this very long diagonal, of course. And after bishop e7, bishop g2 has to be played. And after both sides castles, this is kinda the final position of this variation. But of course, you will play knight to e4 if you are white. You will play c4, you will play c4, bishop g5 in some positions, or bishop to e3. You will put your rooks in the center, and this bishop will ultimately be the decider of the game. If you are able to open up this diagonal, you will win your game, but if not, this bishop will be really passive, biting on granite on these two pawns. But of course, after e6, the main line is to play pawn to d3 in this position, and after knight to d7, preparing knight g to f6. Now this is the most common position arising from the two knights attack, and after bishop g2, knight g to f6 is the best move. But of course, after bishop d2, there is a variation with the move g6 as well, preparing the move bishop to g7, of course, and now white simply castles long, and after bishop g7, now we play the move g4 very aggressively, trying to open up the king side of black, and of course, and after knight to e7, we play the move h4, h6 almost has to be played, of course, not allowing any g5 ideas, and h6 is very good move, of course, as well, because we cannot really play h5. Why? Because g5 would be played, kind of closing down our bishop, and this is very solid position for black, and black is at least equal here. So after h6, queen to g3 has to be played, of course, with the idea of f4 and g5 in the near future. So after queen b6, f4, and now black must castle long, of course, because castling short would be, of course, dangerous, because after f5 or g5, black would get checkmated. So after bishop to d2, probably the better way of playing is to play knight g to f6 in this position, and after g4, h6 has to be played once again, and after long castles from white, now queen b6 has to be played, preparing long castles for black as well, and after queen g3, bishop b4 has to be played. Of course, now black is deciding whether or not to castle short or to castle long, of course, and bishop b4 is simply putting some pressure on the c3 knight, and after f4, this is the final position of the main line of the two knights attack in the Caro-Kann defense, and the position is equal, but of course you can see this is very scary if you are black. White has a lot of kingside space, but of course castling long should be your way of thinking now, and of course after d takes e4, d takes e4, now bishop takes c3 has to be played, and this pawn is hanging on e4, so white has some problems to deal with as well, but of course with this very big space advantage, white should be fine in this position. So this was the theory in the two knights attack of the Caro-Kann, and if you are white, you should play the two knights attack. This is a very dangerous line in the Caro-Kann defense, but if you are black, you should be studying these positions, because you can lose your games very quickly, but if you know what you are doing, you should be fine out of the opening. So if you liked the video, make sure to subscribe to follow more such content, and see you guys in another video.